the Void Fiend. One of the 2 new survivors in Survivors of the Void, and personally, my favorite. Today we're actually going to be going over the Void Fiend in depth. Starting with abilities, then we're going into best item synergies / build for the Void Fiend, and then game tips. As NA's #1 Void Fiend player, this should be the best guide out there for him ever. Yes. Alright, so let's do a little bit of a rundown on all of Void Fiend's abilities. These are very important to get down. Now, unlike most survivors, he doesn't have a separate loadout in his kit. Instead, when you actually play the Void Fiend, there are 2 forms for him, the base form and the corrupted form. So with that in mind, I'm going to go through all of the abilities, but then also show you the corrupted versions when I show you the non-corrupted versions. Alright, begin. So first off, we have the Void Corruption passive. This is basically how the Void Fiend swaps forms. There's going to be a gauge in the middle of your screen, a little circle there, right in the center, that goes from 0 to 100%. At 100%, you swap forms into the corrupted version of the Void Fiend. There are a few ways you can actually affect this gauge. 1, by taking damage. If you take damage, you will gain more corruption. 2, if you have critical strikes, the more you land critical strikes, the more it will increase. And also possessing void items inherently increases the minimum corruption. Now, if you want to reduce your corruption meter, then healing is the #1 way to do that. His special is also able to control which form he's in more reliably, but we'll get more on that later. Just keep in mind that the base form is more centered around being healed up and avoiding damage, while taking damage and being in the midst of things is more the corrupted version. Now, if you just want to know how much it increases passively, it increases about 3% per second from what I've noticed, but because there's going to be so many different variables, the passive regeneration of it doesn't really matter that much. Now, more on the void items affecting the actual corruption level. So once you pick up a void item, you're going to notice there's going to be a little notch on the corruption meter. This is the minimum amount that the corruption can go down to now. Every void item increases this notch's percentage by 2%. So for one void item, it's 2% to 4%, and 50, 100% corruption. That means that you are always going to be in your corrupted form no matter what. Now, to be clear, as it should be obvious by the fact that I said 50, but this just means total void items and not unique void items. You could have 50 fungus and it would still count just the same as you having 50 split up amongst as many different void items as there are. Doesn't matter the uniqueness of the item, it just matters how many total you have. Now, one final note about this corruption meter is that once you get into the corrupted version of the Void Fiend, you actually have 100 armor. 100 armor is a 50% damage reduction. It is the highest amount that any survivor has. Anyway, let's take a look at his primary abilities. So for his uncorrupted version, we have Drown. Fire a slowing long-range beam for 300% damage. This inflicts a 50% slow on enemies, has infinite range, and it has some aim assist in the little aim thing in the middle. It's not a whole lot, but it is very helpful when you're trying to kill certain enemies. Now, the corrupted version of this is a short-range beam that does 2,000% damage and can pierce through multiple enemies, although, again, it is a short-range beam. Instead of inflicting slow on enemies, this actually inflicts a slow on yourself. Funnily enough, because this is actually a debuff on you, if you get Bent's Raincoat, it will counteract this. Now, there's going to be more on this as I finish up the section, the entire ability section, but there is something funny about this ability that I think you're going to want to stick around to find out. But we're going to move on for right now. Void Fiend's secondary, Flood. Fire a plasma missile for 600% damage or fully charge the ability for 1100% damage on a 4-second cooldown. The corrupted version is literally the exact same, except you don't have to actually charge the ability. Actually, no, there is one difference. If you use the corrupted version, it will arc instead of going in a straight line, so it is harder to aim. One key thing to know about this ability is that the charges are independent of the forms. So for example, if I'm in my base form and I already charged up an ability and used it, and now my M2 is on cooldown, if I turn into the corrupted version of the Void Fiend, the ability will actually be off cooldown, so I can use it again. So keep this in mind when you're actually swapping forms, as you just have free uses of the ability right before you're about to switch. For the Void Fiend's utility skill, we actually have Trespass. Disappear into the void, cleansing all debuffs while moving forward in an upward arc. The corrupted version of this ability is the exact same, but instead of moving upward in an arc, you move straight forward quickly. You still cleanse all debuffs when you use both of them. While moving through this form, you have just a little bit of invincibility, so you can use this ability to dodge damage, although you have to be very careful and time it well. You also can't cancel these movement abilities unless you transform into the alternate version. Also, your special skill can be used while you're in these forms. Because your special skill does have a little bit of a cast time on it, it is smart to sometimes use it in conjunction with these abilities. Moving on to the Void Fiend special, we have Suppress. The base form version of this is crush 25% corruption to heal yourself for 25% max health. And the corrupted version of this is literally the opposite. You crush your health in exchange for 25% corruption. Both of these abilities are agile, which means that you can actually cast them while you are sprinting. Also, they are both affected by attack speed, so the higher your attack speed, the quicker you can cast them. So, somewhat sadly, this means that if you pick up a light flux pauldron and you reduce your attack speed, it will take even longer to cast these abilities. The corrupted version has 2 charges on it, so you can't just spam it as much as you want. Although, would you really want to, considering it does take away 25% of your max health each use? And remember, the more you heal, the more you get out of your corrupted form, so you can't really counteract it with any healing. Some fun things to note about these abilities is, 1, if you get a rejuvenation rack, it actually doubles the healing on your suppress, so just a single rejuve rack will give you 50% max health in exchange for 25% corruption. And this is a very, very important tactic to keep in mind. If you stack 13 void items, you can have infinite healing from this ability. Because you will reach the point where your corruption can't go below 25%, you can spam the ability infinitely. Oh, needle tick. Oh, I can do it. Oh my god. It does work like that. Oh. He's broken. A neat little trick, and extremely broken when paired with items like the Nuka. Because again, you can use this ability while sprinting, so there's not much enemies can do really. Alright, so now that we've talked about all the abilities, I just want to say something real quick. I hope someone else noticed. Does the corrupted version remind you of anyone? Does the Void Fiend's corrupted version make you think of another character in the game? Corrupted Drown is just the flamethrower. Corrupted Flood is just the charged nanobomb. Normal Trespass is just mini Ion Surge that's a little bit easier to control and has debuff cleansing. I mean, everyone has been telling me how good the corrupted version of the Void Fiend is, but it's just looking to me like it's Artificer 2 Electric Boog. They really did just jack the Artificer style. But anyway, I digress. Let's actually get into the item builds, item synergy section of the guide. Now to start off, we have to mention the Void items. So there's a lot of synergy and anti-synergy with almost every single item that is in this Void item category. For starters, let's just look at the Weeping Fungus, aka the Wungus. You heal for 2% of your max health every second while sprinting. This essentially means that the more you sprint, the less you're going to be able to stay in your corrupted form. You basically have to stand still if you want to ever be in your corrupted form. Now you might think that's a lot of anti-synergy, but keep in mind that your base form is pretty good. It has almost no range, infinite range on its M1 at the very least, and its M2 is easy to aim, while your corrupted form requires you to be basically right next to the enemy, almost in melee range. So for me, a person who likes to stay in the base form as much as possible, Weeping Fungus is a great item on the Void Fiend. And if you really want to make a case for it, if you just get enough Weeping Funguses plus other items, you could be in your corrupted form all the time. But the Weeping Fungus isn't the only item like this. Lost Seer's Lenses also makes it so it's harder to get in your corrupted form because it takes away your crit chance in exchange for insta-killing enemies. If you remember, critical strikes increase your corruption meter, which means you get in your corrupted form faster. Getting rid of the most viable source of crit chance in the game in exchange for insta-killing enemies for a very small % chance, although I think it's probably worth it, it is something to think about. The one Void item I would say that you guaranteed should not pick up on the Void Fiend is the Lysate Cell. This item only gives you more charges in your corrupted form, which means you kill yourself quicker. It does nothing for the base form. Now for every other item, here's a quick list of some of the best items to get on the base form and some of the items to get on the corrupt form. Starting with the base form. This is going to revolve around healing more than it is anything else. Rejuv Rack, Nuka, Aegis are really great red items. Those focus on healing. If you get a Rejuv Rack, it immediately doubles the effectiveness of your special, so easy. The Nuka then does a bunch of damage because of your healing from your special, and the Aegis just functions as even more barrier for all of that healing you're doing. Weeping Fungus is also amazing for this. And if you're going for the base form, you should pick up every single void item that isn't the lysate cell, and maybe the benthic bloom depending on what you want your run to be. However, large caveat here, if you're wanting to do a base form run and loop multiple times, you might only want to pick up a very few select void items so that you don't end up accidentally going all the way to 100% corrupted and being stuck in the corrupted form. So keep that in mind when you're actually trying that. As for lunar items, you should avoid almost every single one, especially Light Flux Pauldron, the newer item that reduces your attack speed by 50%, but cooldowns are decreased by 50% as well. You don't really have cooldowns on this guy, and your attack speed is attached to like most of your abilities, so avoid that. However, Egocentrism is amazing on the Void Fiend because you're usually going to be up right next to enemies anyway, and it can help you manage having too many Void items if you're accidentally going over the corruption limit. Deathmark's also a great item for the Void Fiend, considering you do actually have a debuff built into your kit with your Drown M1 in your base form, and it's not so hard to pick up a Collapse, a Gasoline, and some Bleed somewhere along the way. Having a lot of health items is nice, but you really don't need much on the Void Fiend. Really, you should be focusing on getting as many corruption items as you can to get to that 13 minimum threshold and then being able to spam your heal. Renalds and Kajaros are two good items. You get a Singularity Band as well. Any of the bands are super good because you have a way of proccing it that's pretty high damage, and both forms like a backup magazine. For the corrupted version, teddy bears are very good. Both space bears and regular teddy bears are both very good, especially for the corrupted suppress, because both bears can block the damage that it does. The space bears can do it every certain amount of seconds, and the teddy bears just have a chance to do it. We already mentioned Ben's Raincoat. That's always super good for anyone in general, but also because you won't get slowed by using your M1. Laser Scope is good because you like doing crit damage and it increases the damage that your crits do. And a word of warning for anyone picking up a Crowbar, a Focus Crystal, which is usually pretty good, and a Delicate Watch on the corrupted version of the Void Fiend. Using the Corrupted Suppress is affected by all three of those items. So if you've ever taken an absurd amount of damage from using this ability and you've had those items, that's probably why. If you're actually interested in staying in your red form as much as you can, avoid every single healing item, and try to pick up as many void corrupted items as you can, except for the lysate cell again. Once you hit the 50 void item threshold, you won't even have to worry about healing because you'll always be corrupted. That being said, before you reach that, there is one way that you can make sure that you're always at full health, but also in your corrupted form. Picking up the two items that don't give you healing directly. They don't technically count as healing, but they are actually healing you. These are the Cautious Slug and the Titanic Neural. While these don't technically count towards healing and won't reduce your corruption bar, they do heal you over time, so it's pretty nifty. Also, by the way, when it says that you need to take damage to gain corruption, it's actually fully dependent on how much damage you take. If you were, for example, to pick up a Repulsion Armor and stack it multiple times so you don't take any damage at all, basically, that means you won't get any corruption at all. There's a bit of a trade-off every time you pick up one of those items. So I think that's about it. I think that's everything you really need to know about the Void Fiend to become number 1 NA. I mean, actually number 2 NA since I am number 1 NA, but you know what I mean. Anyway, make sure to like the video if you liked it and subscribe. Smiley face. Swag Money 69 signing out.